Today, poverty in London. The Prime Minister wants to redefine what child poverty actually is. You may say, look, you can define it as anything you want, but if there are children living in poverty, children living in B&Bs, children going to food banks or having to be taken to food banks because there's no food, and those are all on the increase, then who cares what the definition is? There are obviously more children in poverty. But that is not what the Deputy Editor of The Telegraph argues today. He says in real terms, in terms of life expectancy, in terms of access to toilets and central heating and white goods and mobile phones and simply the quality of our lives, poverty has been hugely diminished and a great deal of progress has been made. I don't know what you think, but we're very interested to hear. 0207 224 2000. Labour's Fiona Twycross says the number of children using food banks has risen by an estimated 17,000 since Mayor Boris Johnson was re-elected in 2012.
Boris Johnson has less than a year in office now, and he's still got a huge amount of work to do to improve the lives of these children who are going hungry, of the families who are trying to support them. And I think he could do a lot more over the next year to make sure that families both in and out of work don't suffer the hardship that people who can't put food on the table at the end of the week are currently going through.
Rosie Boycott was appointed by Mayor Johnson to improve Londoners' access to healthy, locally produced and affordable food. She told The Breakfast Show they are making progress.
We're making quite a lot of progress. It's a very difficult issue. I mean, I'm very behind the Mayor when he supports and champions the London living wage, because I do think that helping to get people out of poverty is, in the long term, one of the best solutions that we can make. I mean, I personally don't want to see food banks in our city in 10 years' time. I don't think any of us do. And the long-term way we get people out is by jobs and is by better pay. But in the meantime, we have hungry kids, and that's, to me, completely unacceptable.
And joining us on the programme, Christian Guy, director of the think tank, the Centre for Social Justice. It was founded by Ian Duncan Smith. Christian, good morning to you.
Good morning, Vanessa.
It really is quite difficult. I mean, I said child poverty, the facts, and then it's quite difficult to know quite what the facts are, how important definitions are, why anyone would redraw a definition of poverty, and what's really going on. So from your perspective as director of the Centre for Social Justice, what is your take on whether child poverty in London is on the increase?
I think there is an important debate about definition, because you what you measure, you manage, particularly for government. So you do the things you're accountable for and what you understand. But there's clearly a need, in my view, to broaden the definition, because at the moment you have this line, an arbitrary income line that says if you're £1 above it, you're not poor.
Right. Just explain to people what the current definition is, because people will just think, poor children, well, we know what they look like. They look undernourished, they're badly dressed, they might arrive at school without breakfast, they don't have clean clothes or whatever it is. What is the actual technical current definition of a child in poverty?
A child in poverty is living in a household which has an income of below or at 60% of the national median. So, but the thing is that hungry children not clothed properly, not turning up to school, that isn't necessarily covered, because they are deeper problems and may not necessarily reflect whether an income level is £1 above or below the poverty line.
And what are you taking the median income as, and what are you taking poverty as?
Well, it's set at the moment, it depends whether you're looking at before housing costs or after and the size of a family, but roughly about £250, £270 a week. So what you're saying is there's a line, and anyone below it is in trouble and anyone above it isn't. And what we're arguing is actually there are some root causes as to why families are struggling, why at the end of the month there may not be enough money to put food on the table, and those things government must be accountable for what they're doing to help families deal with the reasons why they are struggling, not just simply chase these policies that may increase income in a house by a few pounds a week. So if, for example, a family, and this is a minority, but if a family is headed by a parent struggling with perhaps a mental health issue or an alcohol issue, or with poor education, so they're struggling to get work, there are barriers there that need to be dealt with if we hope to give the family a chance to increase their income in the long term. And I'm afraid at the moment the definition leads to government giving just a bit more welfare so that people can get just above an income line, so that politicians can go to bed at night feeling pleased that they've lifted people out of poverty, but they're not dealing with the root causes as to why families struggle.
So what would the redefinition, if David Cameron gets a redefinition of what child poverty is, what would that become instead of 60% of £250 a week? So if you're on essentially less than £150 a week, you're defined as being in poverty. What would it change to?
Just to be clear, I think the 60% is the 250, so the actual national median is higher than that. But
okay.
I would like to see a retention of that measure, because we do need to know who is struggling financially, but we also need to know why. So I'd really like government to report and measure the number of children struggling in families that may have been breaking down, or the number of households where nobody's working, the number of households where parents have low educational attainment, where there are perhaps substance problems or mental health difficulties or serious debt. Which children are we really worried about? Because you could be a vicar living below the poverty line, and we may not be that worried about you because it may be a deliberate choice. You're very happy. You've decided to live on very little. And there may be families just above the poverty line with major problems. And we need to understand who needs help and why in order to get them that help. At the moment, all we know is what's the income. But you may have had a bad year as a self-employed businessman, but have 200 grand in the bank. It doesn't tell us, although your income may be low that year, we're not particularly worried about you. We need to know who we're worried about and why.
But I think some people listening will think that, if you do have an alcohol problem, your doctor will know. If you have a mental health problem, and you've got children, social workers will know. If you're so poorly educated or struggling educationally, somebody or other will know. In other words, you'll already be on the books. People will know about you. It's not as if families like that go under all radar, do they?
No, but if you're in government and you're tasked with tackling child poverty, those things are not necessarily clear. And what the definition has done is given politicians this easy way out, which in good economic times was affordable, just a bit more welfare, some more tax credits, but it wasn't changing lives. And I think what you see is a need for government ministers in charge of tackling child poverty to be held accountable on what they're doing to get more help through social workers. How are GPs working with people tackling child poverty? At the moment, you've got lots of agencies not working together, and at the moment, we just don't know, in terms of poverty and child poverty, which families need what help. For example, child hunger is a very important issue, and charities like Magic Breakfast providing very important services, but according to the definition of poverty, some of those children will be above the line and some below it. And
I see.
That's the trickiness of
Christian, thank you very much. Christian Guy, the director of the think tank. Maybe you think he's right. Maybe you think that child poverty does need to